Today, I get to be with the wonderful Rita Zamora. Rita, I am just so happy that you're joining me today, where we can discuss why it is important in dentistry for dentists and their team to create remarkable patient experiences. Well, first off, let me just say thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for the invitation. It's always great to talk with you.
So I'm excited because I feel like there's so many strategies for growth in dentistry, and oftentimes a lot of the ones that end up getting, I don't know, maybe the ones that seem a little bit more exciting are the ones that have to do with either systems or process or new technology that can help in almost a less human way where we can kind of stand back and just make a lot of money and impact as a dentist. But I feel like when we get to the heart of a practice, it's still about just seeing patients and seeing their humanity and connecting with them on a human to human level. Where do you approach this conversation of creating remarkable patient experiences?
Well, I think when you talked to me about this conversation, I was really excited about it because I feel that we need to be talking about this more than ever today, more than ever because of AI, because of all of the new technologies that are coming out, because of all the ways that we can automate and systemate and systematize. I don't think systemate is a word, but we've got so many ways that we can implement technology, and the more and more technology that we start implementing and the more that AI takes over, I think the more important that those relationships are becoming. So I think we should have equal to the level of technology and AI conversation. We should have at least equal, if not more, emphasis on those relationships and the human experience, especially because in dentistry it is such an intimate service that we're providing for patients. There's a population of patients that has been fearful about seeing the dentist for an eternity. And, COVID didn't help us. There's still some people in the very back of their minds that are very aware of germs and, all the things. And so, keeping all of that in mind, along with the fact that there's a large majority of lawsuits against healthcare providers that are there simply because of poor communication. So we can never go wrong by improving our communication and by looking at how can we elevate these experiences. So I'm glad that we're talking about this today.
Okay, you just did such an amazing job just kind of framing that. And you said something that I thought was really interesting about how it's a very kind of intimate time for an individual where they're really vulnerable. They really have to trust, their body and the outcome with someone else. And I understand that that's kind of accepted in healthcare, but if I go see my doctor, and we're talking about a prescription or something like that, like he's not a surgeon or she's not a surgeon in that capacity. But a
Mm-hmm.
dentist and their team, there's always the surgical clinical component. It's not just the how are things going. It's like the second all of a sudden you lay back in the chair, now we're getting hands on, and it
Yeah.
is it could be like invasive, and felt that way. And interestingly, this could be viewed as a liability, and yet at the same exact time, there are so many brands, like just for example, Coca-Cola, that they're trying to actually brand themselves as something that's more connected to the end user. But it's never going to be a human connection because it's just a product.
Mm-hmm.
And yet the liability of a service company having to interact with an individual where it could go wrong is also the same opportunity for that interaction to be something that's amazing, something that's beautiful, something that's deeply engaging and connected, and that actually elevates that human experience instead of being something that detracts from it. So I feel like the
Yeah.
same thing that makes dentistry so ripe for fear on the patient side can also be that moment, that experience that can be something that can be really transformative where you create these uncommon connections with your patients and lean into it instead of backing away from it and being like, oh my gosh, like there's so much risk and liability every single time I'm with a patient because what if I screw up? And it's like, well, what if you don't? What if you do a great job? And what if you make an amazing connection And now all of a sudden, that patient is elevated and their whole day is just like, you know what I'm trying to say here?
Yeah, I think that a lot of dentists have intentions to provide a caring and warm, friendly experience for their patients. And I think a lot of times, they can also be very practical and what's the word I'm looking for? They're very methodical and almost I compare it to my husband who is a software engineer and architect and very matter of fact and methodical and sometimes, they ask what are different methods, like give me some tactics or what are different ways that I can show patients that I care, other than good communication, which is something we all need to work at. It's something we can all continue to refine. I think something a lot of dentists may not have heard of is this theory called the Johari method, the Johari window. And it was developed by a couple of psychologists. And it's all about how when we can share a little bit of ourselves, you might describe it as vulnerability. Some people might describe it in a less vulnerable way, but anytime that we can share a little bit about ourselves, it allows someone else to feel like they know you better, and then they're more open to feel like they can share a little bit more of themselves too. And so, general dentists especially get a longer period of time where they can develop these relationships with patients, and it might be as simple as that your patients kids are graduating from college or someone is just getting back from an amazing vacation or somebody is a really big chocolate lover or they've got something great going on in their career and remembering little details like that. Sharing a little bit of yourself on social media. Some dentists are more open to doing that than others. But the more that you're willing to share that you love dogs or you're into mountain biking on the weekends or you're into, boating or whatever it might be, then those patients start to feel like they are, you know, getting to know a little bit more of the authentic person that you are, and it helps them to feel more trust and to like you more. And so those are just some little tactical things that dentists can implement.
That is so nice of you, Rita, to get tactical because I feel like you're right. There's this science that is a little bit easier, I don't know, to for what is it, the left-brained individual that wants to again do a great job, control great outcomes versus this abstraction of like art and connection and human woo that's like, okay, well practically like actually outline that for me to something that I can
Yes.
practically implement. And and I think one of the like age-old ways for just people to share in a way that someone else can relate to is simply through story. So like you said, you know, something that came up that week that might humanize you, that you can just share a little bit of your experience just to kind of break the ice. Because as you were saying that, it's like I go from seeing a dental professional that is a doctor that could seem distant, sterile, detached, masked, and and I'm not knowing how this person is like me or understands me. And then all of a sudden they just share something, like you said, about their love for pets or a
Yeah.
hobby that they do or just something in their human experience. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, they're more like me than it seems right here. And it starts immediately reducing anxiety. How can they do that on social? Because I know you're like queen of the social space. What do you end up encouraging dentists, and what are some of the maybe misconceptions about social that they have?
Yeah, I think something that's really important is making sure that whatever you have online matches who you are in real life. And I think a disconnect we have today a lot of times is that, what's become very popular is entertaining social media. So, a lot of team members think, well, I need to get on and entertain. That's what's going to do well on social media. But what's really going to do well and perform best for the practice is getting to know the healthcare provider. And if entertaining is a part of your authentic self, then that's great. If you tend to be funny and telling jokes and are always making the team laugh, and that sort of whimsy and just a little bit snarky or whatever it is a part of your personality, then that's great. But if you have one person that's handling your social media and they're really great at the, TikTok skits or things that are really edgy or, super hysterical, and the patient comes in and that's not what the healthcare provider's personality is like, that's not what your dental hygienist is like, who your patient spends a large majority of time with, or if that's not what your doctor is like, then there is a disconnect there. So I think it's really important to make sure that you are thinking intentionally about what it is that you're trying to get across to your patients. And there are lots of different ways that you can entertain patients without having to step outside of that scope of your authenticity.
Wow. So what I'm hearing is you're giving people permission that they don't have to figure out the perfect trending, um, whatever it is that's,
Dance.
yeah, that's going to somehow trick the algorithm into making them viral, where the reality is you want to be able to show up authentic so that when someone is engaging with that content and then they come in, there is that alignment, there is that resonance instead of that dissonance where it's like, wow, this practice is portraying themselves like they're this fun, hip, goofy, whatever. And then we show up and there's nothing like that. Where now all of a sudden it's
Right.
like, well, that's weird. It's almost like they're portraying that they're a Whole Foods. Then I walk in and it's Walmart. Like you'd feel like
Yeah.
you're duped, right? So I love that you're
Exactly.
giving them permission to be like, well, no, the answer is actually like within. Like, how do you show up when maybe you're with friends? How do you show up maybe at a dinner party with people that are longtime friends that you went to high school or college with? You show up as yourself. Well, maybe that'll give you some clues of how you can try to show up on social media so that it's real, it's authentic, and it's a genuine expression of who you are, not some performance of who you're told that you have to be.
Yes, exactly. And that's really something so important that I've been talking to dentists about since we've been helping them with social media. When Facebook pages were first released, it was the same thing with silly, comics or, funny gifs and things like that. And it's like, if that doesn't represent your practice well, then don't use it. We just want to make sure that we're taking advantage of all of that online real estate and making sure that patients are starting to build trust with you before they've already met you.
So now this may not apply. Like, I'd love to hear what your thought is on this, but from an outsider looking in, I wonder if there's like two things going on where, like, as a dentist, part of my social profile might be, I don't know, I don't want to say posturing in a bad way, but like almost like you're curating how other dentists might see you in terms of like, I want to post the best outcomes. I want to post, that I'm leading or I'm in the foremost, or just so I can earn respect with peers. Where I guess it depends like what your goal is. If this is a practice page and it's for patients, then you don't need to show up in a way where you're trying to impress your peers. But maybe if it's your professional LinkedIn page, maybe it's a little different if it's like from professional to professional. Do dentists ever get the wires crossed and all of a sudden they kind of show up to patients the way that they're almost showing up to peers? And because I mean, patients don't know. Like, I don't think they have as much respect for, oh my gosh, you're this. I don't know. I just wonder if that's ever a confusion.
Yeah, it can be. And I think it depends. You had one of the icons of social media in dentistry on one of your interviews, Dr. Brian Harris, who is incredible what he's done with his Instagram presence. I often will refer to it and just say, this is almost sheer perfection in what he's done, which is really that he had the vision for what he wanted his practice to look like, the type of dentistry that he's passionate about. And when you look at his Instagram, I'll sometimes show a screenshot of that during my live presentations and ask people what type of dentistry this dentist, want to do more of. What is it that he's passionate about? And they know right away that it's veneers or smile makeovers, just these beautiful, glamorous smiles. And you can see right away what type of patient is his ideal patient. So he's really done a masterful job of that. I think in the case where it's a provider who's sharing a lot of bloody, implants or a lot of surgical procedures and things like that, if that's what you're trying to portray, that's your goal, is to be, really followed by and admired by your peers, and that's a goal, then that's great too. So I think it just depends on what your goals are. But once you reach a certain level, like Dr. Harris, for example, you can kind of combine that B to C, the business to consumer, and the B to B, the business to business, as he's, mentoring other dentists in how to do this well.
It's great that you bring him up because every time I see his follower count on Instagram, I'm just like marveling, like, wow, talk about influence. And there's that's not dental professionals simply following him. Those are just like consumers that somehow like the story and the consistency of what he's sharing and putting out into the world. And the result of it is that he gets to do the dentistry that he wants to do, which is simply smile makeovers. I think part of the dream that a lot of dentists have is like, well, what if I didn't have to do all sorts of dentistry? Like, what if I could just focus on the procedures that I really love, and I could be known as the expert that just does these things, and that takes time and positioning and consistency. And I think Brian Harris is a perfect model for how to get that done.
Yeah, and it does take some courage too, because a lot of times we'll ask a dentist what they want to be known for, and they'll, mention, well, just, any patient who needs dentistry and that sort of thing. And that's really another conversation. But I think you can look at creating exceptional patient experiences by, doing what it is that you're most passionate about. Showing patients that story on your social media. You can tell a story through pictures or through videos, but your social media, when you look at it, it should reflect a little bit about who you are and what you want to do and what type of patient you're going to cater to. And then make it easy for that patient. Providing conveniences for patients is another way to show your patients that you care, and providing those exceptional patient experiences.
So Rita, I'm curious, like when you're talking to a practice, and you recognize that one practice here has like exceptional culture where from top to bottom it just seems like everyone's on the same exact page, and there seems like there's more alignment even on a cultural level. Is it easier to work with a practice like that because they kind of already have done a lot of the hard work? Like, meaning if you speak to a practice and it seems like there's all sorts of disjoint, disparate kind of little mini cultures going on, like, do they have to do a lot of the foundational work before they can kind of have more of a unified showing on social media?
That's a great question. And the answer is no, because once you start thinking about how you want things to look and how you want to be perceived, which is one of the first questions that I ask doctors, how is it? Sometimes it's very obvious. Like, I'll have, I just started working with a client recently, and they're really involved with the community. They're supporting fallen heroes. It's just really obvious, how they want to be portrayed. I look at their website and have a conversation with them, and we'll meet for usually an hour before we get started in our work together. And sometimes I don't need to ask, but if a dentist isn't sure, about how they want to be portrayed, then when we start thinking about what we want your social media to look like, then sometimes the social media can kind of really help to motivate you and inspire you to get your team together. To maybe you're like, I don't really like how that clinical room, and I have to say, I've worked with dentists over the years too who have said, I don't want to take pictures of the inside of my office because we're going to remodel it, next year, and I'll wait and take pictures there. And I'm like, oh, I'm sorry, because how hard would that be then? You're working in this environment every day that you don't feel proud of, that you're not happy about. And so I think it can really help to kind of reveal a lot of issues that you might have if you're like, our team never has photos together, bonding or doing these other things that we see other teams doing on social media. Then we think about what are ways that you can bring that, together for your team. Maybe it's National Coffee Day coming up and you're going to bring Starbucks in for the whole team. I mean, I used to do that for my team when I was working in the office. It was a huge perio practice. I have like 3 trays coming in for this, couple dozen team members, but they loved it. It can be little things like that. So that was a great question that you had, because I think it can really help to bring a practice together, whether it's something about your decor that you're not proud of or your culture or whatever.
Well, I love that because what I'm hearing too is like your approach isn't simply like, hey, there's all these outward things that you can do. There's just outward best practices. And if you just follow this, it's almost simple for you to just kind of layer this on top of what you're doing. Your approach very much is like, well, I have questions that almost reveal like the heart of the practice. Like it gets them to look inward. And all of a sudden it does reveal, oh man, like am I proud? Am I proud of kind of like the story we're living? Am I proud of the the office space that we have? It almost forces them in a really good way to kind of get aligned to what a
Yes.
culture could be, to all of a sudden figure out what that brand is that they want to be consistently showing to their patients. And I feel like a brand is twofold. It's not just something that the patient sees, it's also something that your team members see, and it's something that the team members then end up embodying. So it's great that something that seems like, hey, I'm hiring Rita so that we can elevate our social media game. And the next thing I know, wow, we're also really getting like this deep dive kind of alignment of like, these really tough, almost branding questions that get us to almost come to the heart of like, who are we as a practice? Because if we don't figure that out, and if we don't align the social media based off of that, it's almost going to be empty, like you said, or it's going to be misaligned so that it lacks the potential power when that patient comes in. And I think, again, I love that you're saying this because it gives dentists that permission to not feel like they have to figure out the external trends, but more like figure out internally, like, hey, who are we as a practice? And why don't we align our social strategy based off of that? Because that's a game we can win every single day.
Yeah, and it's gonna impact your case acceptance. I mean, it's obviously going to impact the patients that are drawn to your practice, but it will greatly impact your case acceptance. It will greatly impact that patient loyalty. It will greatly impact the amount of referrals that you get, the comfort level that patients have giving you reviews, being able to attract other team members to your practice. And all that's all connected to providing these exceptional patient experiences, because we can't provide exceptional patient experiences without having all of these other things, taken care of as well. So I think that the social media can be just a mirror for what is it that we are doing, what are areas that we might need to improve upon. And at the end of the day, I think it always comes down to ourselves. Like the more that we can improve ourselves, our own communication, our own personal growth, that's always going to help lift everything up in the practice and help to provide those better patient experiences as well.
Okay, so I love that. One of the things I discovered a long time ago when I was doing research was that one of the main reasons patients don't come back to a practice is simply because they experience a general sense of indifference. And I was really thinking hard about that. Like, Like, what does that mean? And I realized like there's a lot of metrics that a practice will track, but it's really hard to identify what metric would track like if a patient feels a sense of belonging, for example. And
Mm-hmm.
yet, if we just look at human to human relationships, human to human connection, where people feel safe enough to open up, where people feel safe enough to almost reveal who they are because there's some element of, either psychological safety or trust that's been there, or like you said, because of vulnerability, it just drives a sense of connection and the sense of I belong. So instead of me just being part of a practice where I feel like I'm getting a good deal or I'm getting decent outcomes, I actually feel connected in a real way with the people. And I don't know if there is like a great metric for that. And that's where I think the danger is kind of what you're saying of like, if we're just looking at metrics and we're just looking at the impacts of technology or AI and everything's just measurable, we might miss some of the things that are harder to measure, which
Mm-hmm.
is, man, patients keep coming back because they just like us and they like who we are and they like that connection that we have. And yet, again, I don't know where that shows up in like a KPI.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't want people to lose the heart of their practice while they're elevating everything in like a very efficient way. And I think efficiencies are great. Systems are great. But I think one of the analogies I go back to is like when you're looking to buy a home and you're going into like a model house, for example, everything is there that would be there the second you move in. Like it's a house, but the second you move in, it's now a home. And there's a big difference
Mm-hmm.
between a house and a home. When you walk in a house that's not inhabited, it doesn't have a soul,
Yeah.
right? There isn't that. I don't, there is no heart. I don't know how to say it. And that's where, as practices are getting more advanced and trying to be more efficient, my biggest caution is don't become simply a house. You still need to somehow find that heart, align yourself with that heart, and still be that home because I think that's what really sets you apart.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really think that that's a great way to describe it. I mean, what's a human without a soul? What is a practice without those relationships? I mean, it doesn't matter what kind of practice you have. If you don't have those strong patient relationships, then you have nothing. So I think the best metric to measure your patient relationships and how satisfied your patients are is in your patient loyalty, longevity, your case acceptance, and showing patients that you care could be in those tangible things like giving your patient a gift or a thank you card or showing them that you care. And it also could be in following up with your patients. I think though there's so many different ways that you can show that you care, and I think that you know a lot of times we are looking too much at the nickels and dimes. What are we spending money on? Some dentists, I heard a conversation the other day that they don't want to give the, patient goodie bags anymore. And I agree, you should be reducing the plastic if you're not already, to please, because we don't need that anymore. People have become aware of that. But there are lots of other ways that you can gift patients, as you know, Sean, and help your patients to just be reminded of you, and keep your name and face in front of them. I do kind of feel I know this business too well, but when I don't hear from my dentist, I'm like, have they just gotten too busy? Like, do they not care about me as a patient? I referred my husband to a dentist a while back, and he entered some information on the website to become a new patient and never heard back from them. So I'm like, I know that happens a lot of times on websites. Your forms can get submitted and then it somehow is broken and it never ends up getting to the practice. But still, it's like, oh my gosh, that should never be happening today. So it's a combination of things for these great experiences. But I did just read a statistic. I'll have to provide it for you for the show notes. There was a study actually done that showed that social media is making it easier for patients to switch providers. Because if you're not out there showing your patient, what you have to offer, and that you care, and that you're vital and active and thriving, they'll maybe see somewhere else that makes it easy for them to switch.
Wow, that's like quite an indictment. It's kind of scary. Um, so, what would just a practical first step be? I know there's probably a lot of different first steps, but for someone
Mm-hmm.
that's like, okay, I want to elevate what I'm doing, I want to focus a little bit more on the patient experience, and maybe it is with social media, but what would be a first step that someone could take?
I think the first step that I obviously specialize in, I'm passionate about, is taking a look at your social media. Look at your Instagram grid, first of all, and at a glance, you can see, does it reflect what I'm passionate about? Does it reflect what I want to attract more of into my practice? And if it doesn't, start there. And then making sure that you are up to date with all of the conveniences that you can be offering your patients, whether it's online scheduling or text communication. Providing those conveniences for your patients is a way to show that you care. Providing dental membership plans. If you don't work with insurance, that's another great way to show your patients that you care. And then thinking about, how are we going to keep in touch with our patients in between their appointments, whether it's an email newsletter or giving them a gift. If you don't want to provide a goodie bag, some kind of a surprise, that the gifts that you talk about, Sean, I think they're very personalized and remarkable and memorable, and make it easy for a patient to want to share on social media how amazing this is, because they've probably not received a personalized electric toothbrush from anyone in the past. So I think things like that are very unique and different, can really be meaningful, and those can be measured in your case acceptance rates, in your patient loyalty, in your referrals, in the reviews that you're getting, in the positive comments that you get on social media.
Okay, and that is Rita Zamora in a nutshell. I asked a question about one thing, and your generosity, you oozed like 10 amazing and practical things that someone can do. And I just want to honor you for your generosity, Rita. So, right now, if someone's like, okay, well, I would love to find out more, see if it's a good fit to work with Rita, where would you like them to go?
They can go to our website at connect90 and book a meeting with me online, and we'll talk about what your specific needs are, whether it's something we can fulfill with the Connect 90 program or our bespoke social media services. And I'm always happy to help in any way.
Rita, I love your perspective, the expertise, the impact that you're making, and just the way you just shine always so brilliantly. Thank you so much for joining me today.